No, I'm just a third year Eng law student. I joined B1 because I missed the deadline for 180 degree, and I'm like, oh, this place is open, so I hopped on over, had a bit of fun.
But yeah, okay. Okay, look, like the big question arises from here is Eng law. We'll get into that a bit later. Um, I think the real question is like you're doing two things that offers aren't affiliated with consulting. You know, people usually try to when they're doing law, they try to stick more to their moots and just generally like studying the whole time. And Eng, I don't think I know a single person in my cohort who even knows what consultants do. So I guess like the real question here is, what drove you to even think about like I'm not gonna say their name again, but other consulting groups as well as B1. Just generally like what got you to I don't want to get this podcast sort of unaffiliated, but what got you thinking about consulting and why do that when your degree is already quite fruitful in what it can achieve?
Well, I started thinking about 180 degrees
I'm
because
sorry,
I'm not kind
don't
of
say the name.
okay. Sorry, when I was gonna join Impetus, it's because I'm kind of stupid in the sense that I don't really do things because I think it's gonna be useful for my future. Like
Uh-huh.
as my degree, as whatever I do, I kind of just pick things that I think would be kind of fun to do, and then I kind of do them. I got a bit of a taste from consulting because nice use of privilege to get a job through a friend who has a really famous dad to get into an internship with some advisory firm. I just love doing that business thing. It was like 10 of us in a room, and my favorite part was the CEO just put up their financials, told us all of the things that they were struggling, and they're like, okay, how are you going to make this business better? And I was just like, oh, this is really fun. So I hopped over.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy that you're going on the up and up again. From dealing with like financials for a financial advisor, you're now advising one of the largest DIY bubble tea sort of providers at home. It's crazy how like how far up you've jumped from now, and it just shows that like the number of opportunities that business one offers, like working with maybe not the best financial institutions, but the best bubble tea institutions, which is really what matters right now. But I think another interesting thing is I agree with your point. Like it's I think the same came to me where maybe consulting was not the appropriate way. Maybe it will lead to a less lucrative career path in the end. But I think it's just something that stood out. Being able to work with something real, tangible, and create something that's in your own control. So I guess that's why I was led here as well. I guess the only one left here is why was Kian led to this path of I guess consulting or even in this case podcasting.
Yeah. Similar to Trav, I think, I really feel that idea of just wanting to throw yourself out there and do something entertaining. As a commerce student, I think you guys are pretty lucky that you're separate of this culture, of this necessity that everyone's got to get involved in some financial club and suit up and get your LinkedIn looking pretty. It's a very pretentious, very, in my opinion, toxic culture. And I remember when I first got into this commerce degree, I was excited, but I was also a bit, thrown off by the vibe
Mm.
by a lot of people. And I went to club expos and I joined the I'm not going to list the clubs that I don't think highly of, but I'll let you guys I'll leave that to your imagination. And honestly, I wasn't really impressed by many of them. I really wasn't. Some consulting groups came in and said, "Yeah, we're a startup consulting group," and I said, "Well, what do you actually do? I mean, who do you help?" They go, "Oh, we
Mm.
we, we run models and market analyses." For a variety of firms. Well, what kind of firms? Why do you actually do it? And the thing was, I actually felt something quite different about B1. I really felt that the people running the expo together actually seemed like friends. They weren't competitors. It seemed a
Mm.
lot more wholesome. And I
Mm.
thought I didn't actually apply to any other clubs than B1, so I was very lucky to get in first go. But that's kind of why I was just impressed by the culture and said, "Heck yeah, I want to get involved with that."
Yeah, I mean, culture is the easiest way. I mean, it has the word in it, the first four letters. Easiest way to get someone to stay somewhere. But I think another thing is yeah, like B1. Look, the social impact we're creating is through our socials, in the sense that we're trying to just create a better experience for students themselves. Because I think you can do whatever you want. You can do social impact. You can do startups. You can do consulting. At the end of the day, like what it really comes down to is like the sort of the experiences and opportunities you provide for the other students. But yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting point, like clubs and all that. But I think what kind of like interests me, I guess, about Big Trav here is so like in the commerce bubble we're quite kind of siloed in the sense that like the only real sort of like form of competitiveness comes from your internships, your case competitions, from your clubs. But I just kind of want to see like what is the competitiveness in like law like what do people do to kind of put themselves out there? I know there's obviously moots and debating, but I think I just want to kind of know like what, because I feel like we're quite sort of separated from that, especially in Unimelb where law really only comes through like in the JD. So what's it like in Monash?
I think it's very similar. I think it's very cutthroat. Like you need to get a good grades, you need to have the right internships, you need to climb your way up those. But I really hate the entire process. I hate the way that you get into clubs. A lot of clubs at Monash. I don't think B1 is like this. It's a lot of brown nosing. It's a lot of getting the older people to like you, and it's very like all the really yucky things of social climbing in high school is just like, look, we're back. In terms of the jobs, it's no one hires, you kind of fight your way in, and then when you're in, you're like, time to photocopy some documents. I'm really lucky that the job that I have now that I recently got, I think it's the only job out there that I'll be happy to get as a law job for a student, because it's basically as a student consultant kind of, you go represent a employee who got fired from their boss in a conciliation with the boss or their lawyer. So you're actually doing lawyer things. You're preparing the case yourself pretty autonomously. You're actually representing the client. And they said in the interview, you're going to be like against a partner at KWM. How do you feel about that? I'm like, oh, exciting, as my heart dropped. But, it is going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, it's really brutal. It's long hours preparing for assessments they don't tell you how to prepare for. Yeah, I should probably be better at it, so I'm the wrong person to ask.
Yeah, I think that's definitely very fair. I think just the idea of like law careers is pretty interesting. Like everyone knows that Suits paints the most accurate depiction of what law really is. But I think I'm not going to name this person, but one of my friends, they essentially said that. Well, I think it originally started from them having like a year 12 internship in this place, but what they said is apparently like when COVID kind of cut down the rates and had to like let a lot of people go in 2020, they just called up the place that they interned at and said, hey, can I work here as a paralegal? And they just said yes. And so they've been working there as a paralegal for about over a year now, and just engaging with that. Obviously, I think that's more of a sort of like a case by case situation. You can't just call up KWM and be like, hey, can I work there as a paralegal? They might not be as sort of like, open to that. But I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think law definitely puzzles me. And I think what is kind of like something that I'm facing currently, I guess, in my degree is I already feel like my interests and my skills are being like sort of like split in two. Like I'm forking my way off where, I'm doing a lot of like practical stuff with like the commerce space and consulting, but my academic background is in computer science, and I feel like I'm not really living out one fully to its extent. So I don't know if that's something you're facing as well, but I can just kind of tell that like when you're doing law and eng, both like they're so like sort of like mutually exclusive in the sense that like the communities are kind of don't really mesh that well together. Maybe Monash is better because it's double degrees, but here at Unimelb, like you'll never see like the commerce kids really interacting with the eng kids unless they're through like clubs or anything like that.
So I think the disconnect that happens for me when I think about it, and okay, this is a bit more serious, it's a bit more terrifying, because when I do moots and stuff, it's like you're fake representing a client. Oh no, you lose the loot, you self-pity, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna like down a couple beers and order Uber Eats. But then I just heard a story from my friend. They set up a volunteer group to help during everything that happened in Afghanistan, to help process visas and speed up the process because they just needed mass numbers to help people to come over. And they were saying how the they're in a group of 3 people, and they're the lowest person on that team. And there's things that you need to do to get visa processed. Like you have to ask for like these 15 documents or something. And they were just saying how lazy the people were in doing it, and how it was some feminist in Afghanistan who is running from the Taliban, and every time they make contact to get the documents and information, there's a risk that they can get captured and all the horrible things.
Wow.
And it's not that I'm not saying that I'm going to be the lazy person who is just going to leave someone that incredible behind and not protect their rights, but it's just a reminder that you're not getting prepared for the gravity of what you're doing in what you're going to face. And I definitely don't want to be like, oh, I'm in property law and this house should be, this fence is wrong. Like, I want to do something important. But then I also realized, what if I don't do it well enough? Oopsies.
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of that in law? Do you feel as though, because it's such a broad field, I mean, like you said, there's property law, there's tort law, and there's human rights law, which you seem to hold pretty close to your heart. Because it is such a broad field, do you feel like the people within your faculty and your peers and your colleagues, you might be more different to each other than you are alike? Do you find it hard to find people with the same values in a law degree? Maybe in the way you do an engineering degree, you find a lot of mathematically minded problem solvers. Do you feel as though law is less connected, or have you been able to find people with shared convictions?
I was lucky. I think most of my friends at the moment are law friends, which I met through debating. And all debaters are very similar in I'm not going to get good enough sleep. I'm going to throw my life away for a stupid argument at a computer screen. And I don't know, they're just all really talkative, extroverted, fun people. And like those were the subset of law people I met. But yeah, there's heaps of different people in law. There's your classic, study all day and night and doesn't really talk much. There's the people who are just I don't really care. Oh no, the assignment's due tomorrow and it's 40%. It covers a lot of different ranges, but I think a lot of people are there because they want to, but I also know a lot of people who are there because their parents said it's a good idea.
Interesting.
I think that's it's definitely an interesting point you brought up, but like whether whether the intent for doing something good like matches like the outcomes that are kind of like come out of it. I think that's something that comes up a lot with generally like people thinking about where their commerce degree will take them. Like a lot of times I think people just accept that like there isn't really much sort of like virtue that you can achieve through like a real job in the current sort of like economy. So because of that, they just kind of like pick the lesser of two evils and go ahead with that. But I feel like law obviously is, I don't know, like is it kind of like ubiquitous, that the sense that maybe it isn't actually achieved like the impact that people say they are, and is this something that oftentimes everyone understands is just not worth following because it's kind of a dead end in the sense of like you could pursue like human rights law, but because it's like international, it's so hard to do anything from like I don't know, an international position, especially now, because I know that's something that like is brought up just generally like social impact projects around the world, where like unless you're in the actual country, there's not really much you can do in helping the situation. So yeah, maybe that's something law faces as well. I'm sure it's on everyone's minds whether they're going to be pursuing a virtuous degree, but yeah.
I mean, my take is, and it's my favorite quote from a law book. It was like 1,000 monkeys at a typewriter could sit at a screen for a few weeks and make better law than we already have. It's just like the law is dumb. It's right in theory, but also, and this is what surprised me, there's so much law that is just not settled. Like there's so many scenarios of things, even when they're very common. Judges are just like, I don't know what it is, but I'm going to take a guess. Or there's this unresolved issue that happens in this case, but we're not going to address what the law is. So even if you are doing things right, there's so much ambiguity in the law that bad people can play around with it. But yeah, also there's just people don't have money for lawyers and they won't go to court and people won't have their case heard.
For sure.
Interesting. Trav, you seem really interested in the law side of your studies. Would you say you're doing engineering and law, which I think we mentioned before this call, are two massive commitments? Massive commitments. I think someone putting in the hard yards to become an engineer is devoting 3-4 years of their life to think a certain way, to solve problems a certain way. And I think it's very similar for law. You are really putting in the time to obviously become qualified to do some pretty significant work that only you can do if you do those years. Having done, undergoing the process of studying both degrees at once, are you more passionate about one or the other? It seems like you've said a lot about law. Does engineering have that kind of place in your heart?
You
And
sound like wait, you
sorry,
fish.
now go on. That was pretty much.
Yeah, you sound like a cousin that I see at a family gathering. Like, oh, well, what do you want to do? Um, I think that they're surprisingly similar in the sense that it's all about problem solving for the most part. It's all about like in law, it's you have a set of facts and you need to use your brain to figure out which out of the whole heap of law we've learnt applies and how can we use the facts that we're given in really creative and constructive ways. And engineering, it's similar. It's how do we use the concepts that we've learnt to this particular problem. So there's more overlap than you think. I still do like Eng, but it's just that none of the clubs have really jumped out of me to do the extra interests. Like I've done a bit at home and I've done a bit of like coding for fun and like Arduino projects where you can like make little, I don't know, pianos or whatever. But the clubs that you can get into, they have like a rover team, so you make like a drone or a rover that you meant to go on Mars or a rocket ship. I just haven't really applied, but also I probably wouldn't get into because you need more experience, and I'm still early in my eng part of my degree. But I'm definitely interested in both. The other thing I would say is there's surprising overlap. Okay, don't tell the job that I already accepted, but I interviewed for a different role on Thursday, and it was for Slater and Gordon developing code for legal technology because tech is being integrated into law. It's how you can sweep through mass amounts of documents. It's how you can just like send out and organize things. There's even code now that will go through judgments, go through a bunch of evidence and figure out the things that are important, or go through judgments and figure out things that are useful for you. So it's like actually an overlap that does exist.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. Like the one startup that comes to mind is Joseph. Like they're automating a lot of like legal processes right now, and they're like kind of paving the way for it in Australia. They're like Melbourne based as well, but I think it's definitely very interesting. It kind of brought up. Well, I don't know. First up, you kind of remind me of like my little like doings with the Arduino, which is very silly. Basically, in year 12 when I was doing my like my project for the subject or whatever for physics, I for some reason had this dumb idea where I was like, oh, what if I like to kind of understand like, you know, how to reduce, oh, I'm trying to remember, but it was something about like reducing the sort of like the severity of, you know, your current passing through or voltage passing through due to static electricity. I wanted to measure it. So I was like, I like put in a physics forum. I was like, so how do I measure static electricity? And then they were all like recommending that I build like some sort of meter which would detect this static electricity and measure it with an Arduino. So I spent about like $60-$70 in like buying the Arduino like R4, buying transistors, buying all these parts and setting it up, only to not actually be able to measure it and realize at that point what I was even doing wasn't actually going to achieve anything. So I had an Arduino box just hanging around. I think that was just kind of like the telltale that maybe electrical engineering wasn't for me. Yeah, I think it's just, yeah, definitely like the idea that everything is, you know, everyone is finding ways in which code can sort of like optimize process. Like I was just doing the case comp for L'Oreal, and that was like such an interesting way to see like how data is so important for like a large sort of conglomerate of beauty companies where like they would essentially receive about 50 million data points every day and then process these to identify which formulas would be the most sort of like you know, the sell the best or be like marketed the best, and they run this through this huge algorithm which would understand like correlations between particular sort of data sets and formulas, and then produce the next makeup formula. So like it is literally a good time. I think clearly Travis has found like his niche with code and law working sort of like at the cross section. So I think yeah, it's definitely a space I think that's going to be moving a lot sort of in the next few years. And you know, Travis probably just made the right choice and started jumping on that early. Without you know, avoiding the topic any further, we see a few little trophies in your background. You mind talking about? Oh, I've got you in the screen catcher. What are those? What are those things for? What are those sort of? Why are you so decorated at this point?
Uh, 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 Did you see Logan Paul's podcast with Tommy in it? I watched that before I came on this podcast, and I found it really interesting. I was like, oh, I want to get an idea of how podcasts work.
So how did Logan Paul and Tommy Innit run it?
It's just crazy that the 17-year-old kid who just plays Minecraft and just starts his videos with like, I'm the annoying kid that always talks about how I date a bunch of women. And he's just dominating the conversation with these like 30 and 40-year-old men. And he's just like messing around. He's just making jokes. He doesn't take a single thing seriously. It was just such a power play. And I tried to be that, but I'm not as smooth as Tommy.
Oh, well, I think you're doing a good job. The annoying is really coming through. I think something that you really kind of talked about as being something your own was your affinity with particular shows that are filmed on islands, which show just the natural connections between two individuals that can be formed in tough situations, otherwise known as Love Island. So care to explain why that is one of your fun facts whenever you enter a situation?
I just think that the beauty of Love Island is you can feel completely guilt-free as you pick apart people's personalities and just roast the shit out of them with your friends. Because there's that like disconnect that shouldn't be real of, oh, they're just like in a show and they're kind of celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the same time, it's just so funny. Like the UK season now, like you have like I don't know, this guy who was just in it for the money and he said, I love you because it was convenient. And you just always have all these dramas and fights. And it's just like you just get to make fun of a bunch of people scrambling for money, power, and fame as you sit in your bed, like laughing with your mum. It's just awesome.
Trav, could you ever see yourself going on that show?
Look, although I know that I could make it in past the appearance barrier, I just don't think I could handle the fame. I'm already too famous right now.
You're getting enough sort of like there's too many women to handle right now and men. So I think it's definitely like you don't have time for it given your intensive degree. So I hope they would be able to like sort of like understand that. But like there are so many interesting shows that are coming around with the same concept that like watching other people's like love lives is like this kind of it's almost parasocial, but because you're poking fun at it, it's not too bad. But I think there's a bunch coming through. Like I was just watching like what they call F-Boy Island the other day, and that's a great one because the concept there is you have essentially 3 females, but you have about I can't remember somewhere about in the 20s of males, and the thing is half of them are proclaimed like F-boys. They like to use F-boys even though it's sort of cringe, and the other half are nice guys, and the thing is the girls they want to get with the nice guys, because they're people who've like overgone trauma with F-boys and they don't want to go through that again. But it's just such an interesting show, and it's probably like one of the most like intriguing ones because you're there in the audience like trying to pick apart who the F-boys and the nice guys are, and like such a dumb concept, but like you just tend to realize that like all of these guys in the shows are all just F-boys who either have the self-awareness to realize that or don't. And you get some really interesting characters. Like there's this one guy who says like he's very manipulative in the sense that he comes across like in a nice way. He's like I like to he's like his famous line is I like to make a girl welcome and make her feel comfortable so she can so I open up to her so that she can open up her legs to me. And I was like, jeez. But that one is crazy. Also, Too Hot to Handle is another interesting thing that I think is across the 3 seasons has kind of just continued to mature. Where now this season they've realized, like, without spoiling too much for people, that the greatest part about the Too Hot to Handle is showing the fact that they are too hot to handle, and that people will break the rules regardless of losing money because they found like the people with the biggest sex drive ever and put them all together who are willing to like sacrifice like thousands of dollars simply to spend a night together, and it's absolutely incredible to watch. Also the what is it like the one where they like dress up in like like the
oh that
makeup?
one scares me.
Like so
it's just a bunch of furries and I'm not into that.
So I don't know if you've seen this on Keon, but there's like a bunch of people who dress up in like full makeup of like animals and stuff, and the whole point of this is that you're meant to like fall in love with people's personalities. But I think what it really reveals, as Travis said, is people's inner sort of like fetishes towards these particular sort of animals and creatures. But yeah, there's so many.
Hectic. I've been missing out, mate. All I've been watching is Suits and Q&A. I'm just a
Suits.
boring old man.
Oh, that is the Suits. Wait.
Boring old man. What are these shows? I mean, my sisters are Bachelor Tragics. Right?
Of course.
That's the OG. That's the OG. And, you know, hearing Travis's psychological interests and that kind of breakdown process, I'm sure The Bachelor was that kind of, that would have kickstarted it, I'd imagine. It's quite entertaining. It's a guilty pleasure. I mean, I don't watch it anymore, but I must admit, once you get an episode or two in, just that idea of almost being the voyeur of people's love life, just, you know, getting a view on their psychology, their insecurities, these kinds of things, you know, from that kind of bird's eye view. It's a bit addictive. It's a bit dangerous, but it's very interesting indeed, and it's really interesting. A mind like yours, Travis, find so much interest in that. Tell me, do you have broader interests in psychology? Is that where it stems from?
It's not really. Like, it wasn't the psychology that interested me. It was just more watching a bunch of people fight over things that were incredibly stupid. And it feels like
just watch Parliament.
Yeah, except they're too handsome in Parliament. I would get too distracted. Wouldn't really listen to them.
Barnaby Joyce, what a man! And we all want to look like him.
Well, I remembered the other show as well. There was essentially it's a spin-off of this show called Naked and Afraid. And Naked and Afraid was a show where this one, Naked and Afraid, isn't a sexual show. Essentially, it's trying to like bring people back to like this place of like sort of like humanity and like just your primal instincts. Essentially, people were put onto a deserted island, all naked. And they just had to try and survive together. So that one didn't have sort of like much sort of like, you know, sexual tension or love energy. It was more about like this idea of like where people were like, you know, usually embarrassed of like their bodies when they're put in a situation where they have nothing else to do, like how quickly like people can become accepting of like themselves and like, you know, other people, and like people just very quickly like adapted to this. But then apparently with the whole kind of wave of Love Island spin-offs, they decided to make Naked and Afraid of Love, which is the same exact concept, except you put people there who are eager to, you know, fall in love. But it brings in some of the most interesting characters. Just like the dynamics are so, people just panic and freeze up when they're like naked and have to like talk in a romantic sort of context. Like there's just people like they don't know what to say. They get frozen in front of a girl, and it leads to some of the most embarrassing and awkward conversations. But again, it's like this guilty pleasure of, you know, luckily that you're not in that situation.
Don't you just feel like a monkey watching like Jubilees, you know, finding the fake gamer amongst 5 gamers, or, oh no, I can't believe Jessica's in a fight with Rachel because, I don't know, Brad was cheating on her. Like,
of course, Brad was cheating. But I get you. It's so interesting.
I think it's, well, I haven't watched it myself, but I think I kindly understood the whole concept. Like, the idea of the documentary, like the social dilemma, right? Like, there's a reason why we keep watching these. It's not because they're good content, but they're sort of manufactured to this extent to like tickle exactly what you need, like these urges within you. And it's like why like products get sold so well to you, why these content is so easy to consume. It's because you can like kind of expect like the sensations that you'll feel from watching it, and you know that that's what you desire. But you're definitely right. Like, that's why I feel a lot more confident in watching someone react to it, because it's almost like we're both poking fun at it, and I'm not just watching it because it's entertaining. Another quick thing that I've stolen from, you know, someone reacting is, have you guys heard of the show Moment of Truth?
No.
Okay, so this is a fantastic show that essentially was this really interesting concept where they interviewed a person before the show and made them go through like a polygraph test and just try to like gauge a bunch of answers from them about like, you know, to understand like when they're telling the truth and when they're lying. And the premise of the show is, you know, this person comes onto the show and they're again with a host, and their whole family, friends, and like their significant partner are sitting there on this couch, and they just sit there and watch. Essentially, what the show is it starts at like just asking questions, you know, generally like, so you know, are you like are you happy to be here? Is this your brother in the audience? Did you enjoy the cake your mum baked? And it so if you're telling the truth, if you're telling the truth, then you get progressed to the next round and get more money. So it goes 1,000, 2,000. If you lie, then you lose all your money. But the show reveals so much about people that it's like disturbing to watch. It's like they ask questions like, so it escalates into like, are you still like in love with your husband? And then they're like frozen there for a second, and they're at a point where they've already earned like $5,000 and like revealed so much about themselves, like the disgusting habits, the fact that they are like they think that dad isn't proud of them, all these things, and they got into a point where like they've lost so much already that they just keep going, and they say like, yeah, I don't love my husband anymore. And then it says truth, and then it's just this weird juxtaposition where the audience cheers, but like they also don't want to cheer because like they're right, like they get the money, but they also, it's such a terrible thing. And you watch like the husband in the thing like clapping just because he wants her to get money, but he's so lost. And then there's just this plot twist where they bring in like her like ex, and they're like, so do you still have feelings for your ex? And then she again says yes, and like they like the money progresses again, and it goes through this whole like this just really uncomfortable situation where it's breaking apart all the ties of her family as she reveals like she's stolen and done all these things to like make her family upset, and she's breaking apart the relationship with her husband for like money. And then they're like, I won't spoil the ending, but like, because I think it's definitely worth a watch, but it just goes to this point where you're like, is it really worth it at this point? But at the same time, like they've done all this point and there's no going back on it, so might as well go the whole way. And it's just that's probably a very interesting sort of like look into like the psychology of people, their relationships with others and money. But that's a hard one to watch.
It's like an emotional Hunger Games.
Oh,
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a bootleg Squid Game.
yes, exactly. I'm still yet to watch Squid Game. I
Yeah,
knew
I'm
this was gonna
looking
pop
forward
up,
to it too.
but I've heard it's like it's inescapable. I go anywhere on the internet, there's a Squid Game meme or behind the scenes or explanation, or the TikTok sound that's just playing. But yeah, it's these are all shows from like the 90s. In the 90s and like the noughties, like anything went by. And it's definitely nice to see that television has progressed in the right direction. Well, I don't want to say right direction, but it's progressed nonetheless. But it's definitely very interesting.
Progressed in the right direction. It's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it?
I think what's an interesting sort of like point that should be brought up is like, when I went to this this sort of startup like student fellowship, it was a community of individuals who all like have startup backgrounds and all that, and some of them were just so incredibly driven. It was almost insane. Like I was just so shocked to see like that they were so like involved in this, and they were always watching podcasts, listening to podcasts, like reading books, like checking Twitter, like for startup news, and they were always like in this bubble and like sort of like suffocated by it. There's one guy who took like a whole year off to essentially read books, and he ended up reading like 60 in 1 year. And what just gets me about this is like, for me personally, like these ideas of like personal development are like, they're so like kind of suffocating, because if you're studying your whole time or working your whole time, and then in your off time you're also like consuming like podcasts for the sake of like improving yourself, or reading books for the sake of like reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, or Rich Dad Poor Dad, you're constantly like, I don't know if you guys feel the same, but like I feel like this separation is important. But I know there's some people who, for them, their leisure is engaging in this and consuming this and like being so involved with it. But I feel like there's an extent to which people should do something like that.
What do you think of that, Travis? I mean, I'm only a first year commerce student. I mean, it's a fancy business degree. My dad's an engineer, and he says, I was thinking about doing commerce arts at Monash. He said, oh, so two arts degrees. You're doing engineering and law. So what do you think of this kind of conundrum that Ivan's just presented? Because you'd have some pretty hefty academic commitments, I'd assume.
Well, my big philosophical take on life is essentially we are trapped in our body and nothing we do will matter. Our vote will not change anything. We can recycle and won't make an impact. And even if we change the lives of many people, those are just blips in an infinite timeline on a tiny bit in space. Therefore, if we're trapped in this world, we can feel happy and we can feel sad. And therefore, our goal should just try and be to be as happy as possible, obviously confined to like not being an immoral, yeah. So in that sense, I really don't I don't get people who overcommit to their work. Like I understand it if that's what makes you happy. But, like play Minecraft, watch some cringe reality shows, go to a park, play with your friends, play some games. It's just a lot more fun. And, like people get so caught up in just trying to be the best and all the pressure, especially when you're in kind of toxic, not toxic degrees, but what you were describing of having to really climb your way up in the commerce. It's just like as your happiness caps at like what? It's like 80K, 100K a year. You just don't get any happier. So who cares?
That's quite a high cap. I was thinking more like 30K. But yeah, I think you're definitely right in that. Like, it was. I mean, it was just Reb the other episode. Like, he didn't really get a touch on it much, but he's talking about like if you ever get if you ever have like 3 hours to spare, ask Reb about consciousness. And then he'll give you his whole spiel about that as someone who said he had like friends who are meditating for like 12 hours every day. And I was like, mate, hit me with 12 minutes in a year and I'm good. But it's definitely interesting. I just think back like, sometimes like I feel like life was a lot more simple. Like when I visited Russia and visited my family there, it just seemed like maybe it's because they don't have much choice. But, they're all living in these kind of like, sort of like small apartments. There was a TV in the kitchen and that was like the greatest sort of source of joy. Like they could watch these like, and they were all square TVs, regardless of it being like 5 years ago. It was just like this sense that if you would eat like this thing called like doktorskaya kalbasa, which is essentially like it was just like sausage with like lots of fat in it. And you would just cut it up, you get some cheese, you get some pickles, and then you'd have your little your shot glass of vodka, and then that would be your peak of happiness. And then, when you had the time in the summer, you would go to your Altai or dacha, which is essentially like Altai is like in the mountains, so like the Alps and stuff. So you'd have every Russian family would have like a house in the mountains, and that was a crazy time because that was that's probably the closest I ever got into something like rural or like sort of like because it was just essentially like it was like on the borders of like Mongolia and the Stans, and it was yeah.
I was just saying, wow. Go on, please. Go on. This is hectic.
So yeah, so you'd go there, and then like the main source of income for a lot of people here was like they would have a bunch of their horses, and they would like pay like they provide like a source of entertainment where you could pay to ride on the horses. There was no saddles or anything most of the time. You just sit on the back of the horse, and they would like kind of like trod you over to like the beach, and you'd walk around there, and then you'd pay them like it was barely anything because the Russian currency is. It's not going too well, the economy, but yeah, and it's just like a lot of the things there is kind of like frozen in time. Like they were all like walking around shirtless and no one cared. It was like in the mountains. We also had our neighbors, like they had their own cow, so sometimes we would get like fresh milk and cottage cheese and sour cream, which was all fresh. And if you ever had fresh milk, it's very hot and it's very like fatty. Like it came in this huge jar and we drank it and I was like, oh, it's so gross. It's because it was so like hot and it's just so weird to have like freshly, and it's like a difference to like microwaved hot. This was like you could tell that it just came from like a living creature. And so that was great. There was obviously an outhouse as well, so you're not gonna have like proper like plumbing and like sort of like filtration systems there, so you got really used to like the sort of situation in our house. It's a nice little like wooden box, and then in Russia they also have I want to be embarrassing my parents because I can't remember what it's called, but it was banya, which is essentially this big wooden box where you would all sit in like shirtless, without pants, just barely wearing anything, and you'd put like rocks into it and like hot rocks, and it would like steam off the place. And it's kind of like a sauna, but like it's just a little bit different. And then what they would do is they'd grab like these like bristles of like leaves, like dried leaves, and they would whack you with it to like kind of get the sweat off you, and you'd get like whacked by it, and it was just like, you know, traditional. And then oftentimes when it was in the winter, after that you'd go and you'd jump in like the snow, and you'd jump in like the cold water, and this was like a way of like waking you up and improving your metabolism. And there was like something called vodne procedury, which is a way where Russians would avoid like, you know, getting sick in the winter by training their bodies day by day by like essentially dipping like first, like, you know, with a bit more clothes, and then occasionally getting to the point where they'll be able to jump into like the freezing lake with just their briefs on. And this was a way of like improving your like your immune system for the winter. And so yeah, look, there's modern medicine for you. Things don't change, but I think yeah, it's just very interesting like where different sort of sources of happiness can derive from. For my grandpa, he was eating like, you know, salami and pickles and watching old Russian TV shows on the kitchen, like in the kitchen. And for others, I guess it's, you know, listening to podcasts, and it's all a matter of perspective in that sense.
See, I found that really interesting, purely because my idea of Russian culture only comes from Russian hard-based videos, where you just have a bunch of people wearing like speed glasses, holding their cigarette as they're doing the craziest stupid dances. So that was really interesting.
Yeah, that also happens. But I show you a bit more modern. Like, I think I just wasn't shown that as a kid, so maybe that's a bit more representative. But it's like, it's also like all the urbexing in Russia. So that's, I had friends who were like obsessed with urbexing. They would do it in the school though. It was kind of weird. But yeah, urbexing is crazy. I had a friend who just had a fantastic time in Sochi. So Sochi is a fun place, and I learned this in my Russian class because it essentially has summer and winter activities all year long. So you can do skiing in the summer because they have like facilities there to support it, and you can go like swimming in the winter because the lakes are just really warm. So it's like the perfect holiday destination where like everyone in Russia and the surrounding areas goes to, and it's crazy. So if you're ever in Russia or Europe, Sochi is probably the place to go, or St. Petersburg. That's also a lovely place. But...
Oh, interesting. Wow. Thank you for that, Ivan. I just wonder, Trav, does that sit in line with that philosophy? I sensed a bit of Nietzsche in there, a bit of nihilism of saying, oh, fuck it, you know, there isn't much more to this. It's a kind of zero-sum equation. Do you think that we've overcomplicated happiness? Because you're saying, given nothing really matters after all, in terms of, not nothing matters, but maybe it's pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. In seeking that happiness you mentioned, do you think we've overcomplicated it? Do you think maybe in your own life and in our lives, maybe we'd be happier if we just dialed it back to the simpler things, like Ivan had just mentioned, the hot milk and the old school saunas and all that?
I mean, the best way to illustrate it is if you just take a second to think back about what are some of your happiest memories. It's probably not something, you know, huge. Like, I don't know, none of us probably discovered an insane invention, but it's probably just like a moment we shared with our friends at the beach, or a time when you were with your friends watching a movie and you like stopped to look around and saw how happy you were because you loved everyone around you. Those are the kinds of moments that, you know, get to you. And so that's kind of just where happiness comes from. It's doing whatever. If you get happy from, I don't know, doing 10 hours of discovery in a law firm, like go for it. If you get happy by like watching movies and hanging with your friends or going to parties, go for it. It's really up to the person.
It's just made me reflect, Trav. My God,
I think
it's hit the heart.
There's interesting sort of like, because like human suffering has always been sort of an sort of an important component of like the ability to persevere and create like sort of adapt to it and overcome it. But recently, we're in a position where it's very difficult for us to suffer through things and like have to like challenge ourselves to get certain desires, because we can meet them all very easily through the use of our mobile devices, like, you know, accessing food cravings, accessing like you know, your urges, or even like just needing like some sort of entertainment is just one button away. And there's a belief that because it's so easily accessible, you sort of become like desensitized from this sense of like, you know, reward and fulfillment as you did get when you were like hunter-gatherers. It's come to the sense that like maybe there is a necessity for us to feel like we deserve something, and we've kind of repurposed that in other sense, creating additional stresses for us in our like fabricated scenarios and situations that we bring into our lives, as opposed to actual general fears that come as a like predators and just general survival instincts. And like this intermeshing of the two is creating this weird sort of like limbo where people don't know how to act, and they're self-diagnosing themselves and just like receiving these like symptoms and just generally like traits of that you would receive in very, very dire situations back then. So it's kind of this interesting situation where we don't know what's happening to us right now, and because of that, like everyone is so much more confused.
So interesting. I don't know. I feel like some of those fabricated situations are pretty necessary. I mean, I'm not sure about you, Trav. I'd love to hear your take on this, but Reb, who we had not long ago as a fellow Copite, like me, massive Liverpool supporter. I don't know, sport, although it's a fabricated scenario, is by definition, I do think it really does bring a lot of happiness. I mean, I'm a commerce student now. I don't play football, or you may call soccer, as religiously as I may have used to, but I find that so important to my happiness. I mean, the other day it was bucketing down with rain where I am. I don't know about you boys, but the local pitch was flooded. It was a mud pool. And I thought, F it, I'm going to go out. I haven't felt rain on my skin in too long. I'm going to go out, kick a ball with a mate. It absolutely muddied up. And it was, I think, the happiest I've been in a couple of weeks. Playing a sport, creating a scenario, the urgency to kick a goal. Sport, music, politics, business. I really do think I personally think we have developed as people, and we need more complex scenarios. If they're fabricated or not, we need them to operate. I really do appreciate, though, that necessity of simplicity, as Ivan has touched into. But I, for one, maybe my favourite things in the world, other than family and whatnot, are sport, are politics, are business. And they're all very constructed arenas. So that's kind of my take on it. What do you think, Trav? Maybe you don't have to go into detail about those trophies, but, I may enjoy that they come from sport. Maybe not. And if not, that's fine. What do you think of that kind of dichotomy?
So first, to deal with the idea of sport, politics, business, I think it's a lot more simple than you described it, in a sense that when you think about like human history and you think about how life's developed, you see that the central idea that always forms and an idea that always gives people happy is collectivism and group identity. The reason why, like, issues of radicalization aside, the reason why churches in like developing nations, their proselytization process is something really good, is that it gives people with struggling lives a community to build on, something to believe in spirit, a way that you can connect with a stranger on the street. And it gives a sense that it gives kind of an explanation and a purpose to a pretty unimportant life, in the sense that you're probably not going to do everything I said before, but maybe there's a lot to, like, being part of a collective group expands the impact that you will have on the world. So when you're a part of that sports team, the bit that elevates you is being in the crowd and hearing the screams of everyone. It's knowing that you can strike a conversation with anyone and they just know the same things that you know because you're part of that group. I think similar can be said for business, being part of that team, that organization, all wanting to do something good. Politics is a shithole. I don't really care about that. In terms of what Ivan was saying, I agree that in a path to pursue greater happiness by following all these wants, it's also led to a lot of ways of people tripping over because they struggle with depression, finding the job. There's a lot more ways in which people can become unhappy when they've already had their like basic needs satisfied. And it's really sad to see, especially in lockdown, lots of people struggle because it's like that kind of like gamified way of trying to get instant rewards. It's a lot harder when you've had a world where you can basically do whatever you want and now you're trapped in home. So I think, yeah, it's created some benefits, like was pointed out, but also, it's made it pretty hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Do you boys have anything else to bring off your chest?
No, that was great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I thought that was a beautiful ending, nice and philosophical. Trav, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, mate. I think you've done a smart thing by not telling us about those trophies. We're going to need you back.
Yes.
Any more to talk about? No,
How do you guys remember? It's such a clever distraction when I started talking about Tommy.
I don't know. I think the Tommy wore off, and after the Tommy wore off, I think I just remembered a little bit of why we got to this point in the first place. But yeah, next time just make sure you take them off your shelf, and then I won't have anything to remind me. But yeah, okay. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in, and you'll catch us soon. Maybe it'll be to tell you what Travis's trophies were in the first place. Take care, everyone.
Awesome. Cheers, guys. Thank you, Travis.
Thank you.